On a bright winter morning, a retired Navy officer saw a wounded canine mother fighting the icy river for her 3 puppies. Alden Crowther had come to the Elkstone only to fish, not to make another life-or-death decision. But when Vesper began slipping beneath the water, he stepped back into the kind of responsibility he had spent years avoiding. Saving the dogs was only the beginning, because the broken carrier had come from somewhere upstream. What Alden found there would force an entire town to choose between protecting its past and saving the lives still in danger. This is a story about loyalty, sacrifice, and the strength found when no one is asked to hold every line alone. Tell us where you're watching from, share your thoughts, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers. 4 lives in Whitewater. Alden Crowther preferred the river before the town woke. At that hour, Brightwater seemed less like a place built by people and more like something the mountains had allowed to remain. Snow lay clean across the banks of the Elkstone River. The pines stood dark and still beneath a pale blue sky, and the morning sun touched the ice along the shallows without warming it. Alden stood near a bend where the current narrowed between 2 shelves of stone. At 63, he still carried the broad shoulders of his Navy years, but age had taken the unnecessary weight from him. He was solid rather than imposing, dressed in an old olive-gray combat shirt beneath a weathered field jacket and brown military trousers faded at the knees. His dark hair was cut close, silver beginning at the temples. With his face clean-shaven, there was nothing to soften the square line of his jaw or the watchfulness in his gray-blue eyes. He cast into the darker water beneath an overhanging bank and listened. That was why he came here. Not for the fish, though he occasionally brought one home. Not even for the quiet itself. He came because the river did not ask him to decide anything. Water chose its own direction. Ice broke when pressure became too great. A stone could divide a current without wondering which side deserved more of the river. Alden understood the dishonesty of that comfort, but he returned to it anyway. The first sound was so weak he mistook it for a raven somewhere upstream. He adjusted the line and waited. The sound came again, rough, broken, unmistakably canine. Alden turned toward the upper bend. For several seconds, he saw nothing except sunlight flashing across moving water. Then a dark shape appeared between the rocks, disappeared in spray, and returned closer. It was not a log. A wooden structure spun slowly in the current, half submerged on one side. 2 low walls remained attached to a rectangular base, along with a torn section of wire mesh. Inside the shallow enclosure, 3 German Shepherd puppies were pressed together so tightly that they looked like one trembling body. A larger dog swam beside them. The German Shepherd's yellow and black coat was almost invisible beneath the water. Only the dark saddle across her back and the top of her head showed clearly between the waves. A faded red harness was caught in the torn wire, tethering her to the floating box. She was not pulling it. She was trying to keep it from turning. Each time the current swung the structure toward the rocks, the dog struck it with her shoulder and forced it back into the deeper channel. Her head dipped lower after every effort. One ear stood upright. The other had a small V-shaped tear near the tip. Alden dropped the fishing rod. The box was moving toward a narrow run where the river accelerated between 2 granite outcrops. Beyond that point, the current struck a fallen pine and broke into a field of half-submerged branches. There was no room for error there. Alden ran along the bank, boots punching through the crusted snow. He did not enter the water. Not yet. The current near the bend was too fast, the bank too steep, and no one knew where he was. He pulled his phone from his jacket. Gideon Rourke answered after the second ring. "What did you lose this time?" "Bring your cold water kit to the East Bend." The humor left Gid's voice. "What happened?" 4 dogs in the river. 1 adult, 3 young." "How far out?" 30 yards and closing." "I'm near the county marker. 2 minutes." Alden ended the call and ran for his truck. The rescue rope was coiled behind the passenger seat. He pulled it free, checked both ends, and clipped a flotation vest over his jacket. His hands moved with an old precision that required no memory and invited too much of it. Check the buckle, test the release. Never trust one anchor. Never enter moving water without someone holding the line. The last rule pressed hardest against him. He looked back at the river. The dog's head vanished. For 1 second, there was only the wooden box and 3 small bodies shifting inside it. Then the shepherd surfaced again, coughing water, her muzzle barely clearing the current. Alden felt something inside him tighten. Not panic. Panic was quick and bright. This was older. It was the knowledge that a decision had already begun before anyone gave permission for it. A green utility truck slid to a stop above the bank. Gid Rourke climbed out carrying a yellow throw bag and a bundle of static rope. He was shorter than Alden, thick through the chest, with a weather-reddened face and dark hair thinning at the crown. His mustard-colored rescue jacket made him look almost cheerful against the snow, though nothing in his expression was light. "Show me." Alden pointed. Gid studied the moving box for less than a second. "We take them at the gravel shelf." "That's what I saw." "Anchor there and there." They worked without ceremony. Gid wrapped the main line around one pine and backed it with a second anchor farther uphill. Alden clipped himself in while Gid marked the line with his gloves, testing the knot 3 times. "You go no deeper than your waist," Gid said. "If the dog drops, you go no deeper than your waist." Alden met his eyes. Gid tightened the final strap across Alden's chest. "You called me because you didn't want to do this alone. Don't change your mind halfway through." The words landed harder than they should have. Alden looked back toward the river. The floating enclosure had reached the beginning of the gravel shelf. The current widened there, losing some force as it spread over submerged stones. It was the only place where a person could enter without being immediately taken off his feet. "Line ready," Gid said. Alden stepped into the elkstone. The cold struck through his boots and trousers with the force of a blow. By the 3rd step, his calves burned. By the 5th, the water reached his thighs and shoved against him hard enough to test the rope. He moved sideways, never turning his back to the current. Gid fed him line from above. The wooden enclosure came closer. One puppy tried to climb over another and nearly slipped through the torn side. The adult shepherd twisted, used her shoulder to knock the box flat again, and disappeared beneath the surface. Alden lunged as far as the rope allowed. His hand closed around the wooden edge. The dog came up beside him, eyes wide but focused. They were dark amber, almost brown in the shadow of her black mask. She did not look relieved. She looked at his hand, then at the puppies. Alden tried to pull the box toward him. The shepherd snapped. Her teeth closed on the air inches from his wrist. "Easy," Alden said. The current struck the box sideways. One of the puppies cried out. The shepherd forced herself between Alden and the enclosure, though her hind legs were barely moving. Alden stopped pulling. For one suspended moment, man and dog faced each other in the white water. He could overpower her. She was exhausted, trapped, and injured. He could grab the harness, use the line, and drag all 4 toward shore. He had once believed that being able to force an outcome was the same as being responsible for it. The river pressed harder against his thighs. Alden lowered his hand. "I'm not taking them from you." The dog's lips remained lifted. "I'm taking all of you." He kept his voice low and flat. Not comforting, not commanding. Simply steady enough to give the animal something other than fear to measure. He reached first for the wire tangled around her harness instead of the puppies. The shepherd watched him. Alden found the twisted section and pulled it free from the wooden frame. The wire had cut through the faded red fabric and rubbed the dog's shoulder raw. When the tension released, she nearly rolled beneath the box. Alden caught the harness. The dog snapped once more, weaker this time, then froze when the smallest puppy whimpered. Her head turned toward it. That was the moment Alden understood the order of her world. The puppies first, pain second. Everything else after. "Gid," he called. "Bring the box in." The rope tightened behind him. Gid threw the yellow rescue line across the enclosure, caught one of the remaining mesh sections and began drawing it toward shore. Alden kept one arm through the dog's harness and used the other to steady the wooden base. The shepherd stopped fighting him, not because she trusted him, because she had run out of choices. The water became shallower. Gid waded in from the gravel shelf, secured the box, and lifted the first puppy against his chest. Alden guided the shepherd forward, but her hind legs folded beneath her as soon as they reached the stones. She tried to rise. She looked toward the puppies. Then she collapsed against Alden's knees. He knelt in the water and gathered her before her head struck the rocks. For a fraction of a second, her forehead pressed beneath his chin. Wet fur, freezing water, and the raw leather smell of the damaged harness filled his breath. Alden had held injured men before. He remembered weight changing when consciousness left a body. He remembered knowing, before any doctor spoke, when someone was no longer helping to carry himself. This dog was still carrying everything. Even unconscious, one front paw reached weakly toward the wooden box. "We have them," Alden said. He did not know whether she could hear him. "We have all three." Gid carried 2 puppies up the bank, then returned for the third. Alden lifted the shepherd with both arms. She was lighter than she looked, her soaked coat hiding a body worn thin by nursing. By the time they reached the truck, Alden's hands were shaking. He told himself it was cold. Gid did not challenge the lie. Dr. Corinne Bell arrived at Alden's cabin 20 minutes later with a medical case in one hand and a folded heat pad beneath the other arm. She was broad-shouldered, red-brown hair pinned behind her ears, her cheeks bright from the cold. Her expression softened when she saw the puppies, but hardened again the moment she noticed the stove. "Not closer," she said. Alden had placed the wooden box several feet from the fire. "I know. People who know still panic. I'm not panicking." Corinne looked at his soaked clothes and white knuckles. "Of course not." She worked quickly without appearing rushed. Warmed fluids, dry towels, controlled heat beneath layers of blankets. She checked each puppy's gums, breathing, and temperature, then marked the time in purple ink on a piece of cardboard. The largest male shivered violently, but responded to touch. The second pup, a dark-faced male with a white mark on one front paw, tried weakly to crawl away whenever the floor vibrated. The smallest female barely moved. Corinne placed her against the mother's abdomen, then listened with a stethoscope. "This one concerns me." Alden crouched across from her. "What do you need?" "Quiet, warmth, time, and for you to change before you become my 5th patient." The shepherd stirred as Corinne cleaned the wound on her shoulder. One amber eye opened. Her head lifted immediately. She looked past Corinne, searching. Alden moved the wooden box closer so she could see all 3 puppies. The dog lowered her head again. Only then. Near noon, Gid brought in the section of wood he had cut free from the floating enclosure. He set it against the wall beside the door, where melting ice ran down its splintered surface. "There's lettering underneath." Alden turned it over. A burned stamp emerged beneath the mud and scratches. "Northlight Working Dog Cooperative." Corinne stopped writing. "I know that place." Before she could say more, Alden's phone rang. The caller was Tessa Wren, a trainer from Northlight. Her voice came fast and controlled, the way frightened people spoke when they had spent years teaching themselves not to sound frightened. She confirmed the shepherd's name. Vesper, 7 years old, retired search and rescue canine, mother of the 3 puppies. Then Tessa asked the question no one in the cabin wanted to hear. "Did you find Lenora with them?" Alden looked toward Vesper. The dog had opened both eyes now. She lay weak and trembling beneath the blankets, her torn ear angled toward the door. "No," Alden said. "Only the dogs." There was silence on the line. Tessa explained that she had been unable to reach Lenora since before dawn. Trees were down across the access road. She had assumed the power and phone lines had failed, but Vesper would never have taken the puppies away from Northlight without a reason. After the call ended, the cabin settled into the soft sounds of recovery. The stove ticking, Corinne's pen moving across cardboard, 3 puppies breathing beneath blankets. Vesper lifted her head. The effort made her entire body shake. She looked at the door, then toward the north-facing window. A low sound escaped her. Not a bark, not quite a whine. Alden moved closer. Vesper touched her nose to the smallest puppy, then the second, then the third. Only after counting them did she look back toward the mountains. Alden understood. The dog had not forgotten where she came from. More troubling than that, she did not believe her work there was finished. And for the first time in years, Alden felt the river ask something of him. The evidence the map could not hold. By morning, the river had already begun changing its story. The snow along the bank had hardened overnight, sealing footprints beneath a thin crust, but the mud at the waterline remained fresh and dark. Alden stood above the east bend with his hands in the pockets of his field jacket, looking at a stripe of brown ice caught between 2 rocks. The day before, the Elkstone had carried 4 dogs past this place. Now it moved with the deceptive calm of water that had already spent its violence elsewhere. Behind him, Gideon Rourke shut the truck door with his hip and lifted a yellow rescue bag from the bed. "You plannin' to stare it into confessing?" Alden crouched near the edge. The river was higher. "Yesterday?" "Hours before we got here." Gid came down the bank carefully, testing each patch of snow before trusting his weight. He had traded the bright rescue jacket for a canvas vest over a gray wool sweater, but the yellow throw rope still hung from his shoulder. "How much higher?" Alden pointed to the line of debris lodged in the willows. 18 inches? Maybe more? Gid studied it, then looked downstream. "That's a short rise. And a fast drop." A natural flood did not usually leave so neat a mark and retreat before the bank had time to soften. Something had pushed a body of water through the channel, then stopped. Alden touched the brown ice with one gloved finger. Silt was trapped inside it. Not river sand. Finer. Clay and organic matter from somewhere above the rocky reaches. His phone vibrated. Corinne's name appeared on the screen. He answered at once. "The puppies are holding," she said without greeting. "The smallest female took warmed formula twice during the night. Vesper's temperature is normal, but she is not leaving the blankets today. I wasn't planning to bring her." "You were thinking about it." Alden glanced toward Gid. "You can hear thoughts now. Only the dangerous ones." Corinne lowered her voice. "She keeps orienting north. That does not mean she is physically capable of going north." "I know. Knowing is not a treatment plan. I left her with you, and I appreciate this brief encounter with good judgment." The line went quiet for a moment. Behind Corinne, Alden could hear a puppy complaining in thin, persistent squeaks. "Any change in the mother?" he asked. "She ate half a bowl, drank. Let me clean the shoulder again. She still counts the puppies every time she wakes." Alden looked up the river. "I'll be back before dark." "That depends on Sheriff Dane." The call ended. A county SUV appeared through the pines before Alden could ask how Corinne knew Hollis was coming. Sheriff Hollis Dane stepped out wearing a dark green winter coat with the county seal stitched over one breast. He was broad through the middle, not heavy so much as settled, with iron gray hair cut close around a face that rarely seemed surprised. His eyes moved first to the river, then to Alden, then to the rope over Gid's shoulder. "You two already planning to ignore me?" Gid lifted both hands. "We were waiting for an audience." Hollis stopped at the bank. Tessa Wren filed a missing person concern for Lenora Say at 6:10 this morning. Road Patrol found trees and mud across the Northlight access road. No one goes beyond the closure alone. Alden nodded. The sheriff watched him for a second longer, as though disappointed not to have an argument. A second vehicle arrived behind the SUV, a white utility truck with the emblem of Brightwater Hydroelectric on the door. The woman who climbed out carried a waterproof case under one arm and a rolled map beneath the other. Marin Locke moved quickly without appearing hurried, placing each boot with exact care on the icy shoulder. A pale streak of silver ran through the dark hair at her left temple. She wore a slate blue shell jacket, black field trousers, and thin-framed glasses that caught the morning light. She gave Hollis a brief nod. Then she looked at Alden. "You found the dogs?" "A few miles below Northlight." "I reviewed the overnight release records." No introduction, no sympathy, only information. Hollis supplied the missing courtesy. "Marin Locke, hydraulic engineer for the plant. Alden Crowther, retired Navy damage control officer. Gid Rourke, who has opinions about knots." "Most knots deserve opinions," Gid said. Marin unfolded the map across the hood of her truck. "At 11:47 last night, the auxiliary gate released 800 cubic feet per second for 22 minutes. That is within approved winter limits. The main channel rose temporarily, but not enough to damage a structure built above the setback line." Alden looked at the contour lines. "Was Northlight built above the setback line?" "It is on the registered elevation." "That isn't what I asked." Marin removed her glasses and wiped them with a cloth, despite the lenses being clean. "The cooperative was approved under the historical flood map." "How old?" 17 years? Gid let out a low whistle. Marin put the glasses back on. "That does not make it wrong." "No," Alden said. "It makes it old." Hollis closed one hand over the edge of the map before the exchange sharpened. "We're not assigning blame on the roadside. We are locating a missing woman and determining whether more people are at risk." Marin tapped 3 marks along the river. "The plant uses these gauges to confirm safe discharge. 2 reported normal conditions." "And the third?" Alden asked. "A temporary communication failure." "When?" Marin did not answer immediately. That pause changed the shape of the conversation. She opened the waterproof case, removed a tablet, and brought up a sequence of data. The upper gauge stopped transmitting at 10:19. "More than an hour before the release," Gid said. "The other stations remained functional." Alden looked from the screen to the river. "And no one checked the failed one in person. There was no safe road access at that hour. So you treated silence as agreement." Marin's jaw tightened. "We treated 2 independent measurements as sufficient." The answer was defensible. That made it more troubling. Hollis ordered them into 2 vehicles. They drove upstream until the county road narrowed beneath heavy pines, and the first mud appeared across the snow. Alden watched the river through breaks in the trees. It ran 20 feet below the road in places, then climbed close enough to touch the embankment. Along one bend, a line of broken alder branches all leaned downstream at the same height. He asked Hollis to stop. The sheriff did not argue. Alden descended with Gid, while Marin remained near the road, studying readings on a handheld meter. There were fresh gouges in the bark. Brown foam had dried in pockets above the current. A large slab of river ice rested upside down on the bank, its underside coated in dark sediment. Marin joined them. "That could come from local bank failure." Alden broke a piece of clay from the ice. "No clay bed here." "There is one near the upper feeder." "Near Northlight." She looked toward the slope, then back at the meter. The device in her hand gave a soft tone. Marin frowned. What? Hollis asked. The conductivity is elevated. Gid looked at Alden. In language for people who sell rope? The water is carrying material it usually does not, Marin said. Soil, minerals, possibly runoff from a disturbed bank. Alden did not say he had told her. He had learned long ago that being correct too early could make other people defend the wrong thing longer. They continued on foot when the road disappeared beneath a tangle of lodgepole pine, mud, and splintered branches. The slide was not deep enough to bury the road completely, but wide enough to stop any vehicle larger than a snowmobile. Tessa Wren waited on the far side. She was smaller than Alden expected, wearing a navy puffer jacket over a charcoal training vest. Her dark blonde hair was cut short around her face, and a red clicker hung from one wrist, though there were no dogs with her. She had been trying to clear branches with a folding saw, and anger. Lenora's truck is still up there, she said. So are 4 adult dogs. Hollis stepped onto the slide. When did you last speak to her? 8:30 last night. She said Vesper was restless and the creek sounded wrong. Why didn't she leave? Because Lenora believes every emergency is easier if she stays near the animals. Tessa's voice carried equal parts loyalty and frustration. She turned to Alden. How is Vesper? Stable. Shoulder wound, muscle strain. The puppies are alive. Something loosened in Tessa's face, but only briefly. Did she fight you? She tried. That means she still had something left. Alden did not tell her how little. They worked around the blocked road rather than across the unstable center, climbing through timber until the river reappeared below them. Snow covered most of the ground, but not enough to hide disturbance. Tessa found the first tracks. 4 small impressions close together, then a deeper print beside them. Vesper. The path began near a break in the fence and moved away from the North Light access trail, descending toward the river. Alden crouched. The puppy's tracks were uneven, stopping and starting. At several points, the larger prints doubled back. Vesper had not been running with them. She had been moving them one at a time. Tessa stared at the pattern. She would never take newborns downhill. They are not newborns, Hollis said. She would never take 11-week-old puppies downhill either. Alden followed a shallow drag mark through the snow. The box. What? She moved the carrier base first, then brought the puppies to it. Marin stood several paces uphill, looking back toward the river. If she did that before the water arrived, she detected something. Dogs hear ground movement, Tessa said. Low vibration, timber shifting, water beneath ice. Marin studied the tracks for a long time. For the first time since arriving, she did not reach for the map. The route led them to a narrow overlook where the land dropped sharply. From there, North Light should have been visible beyond the next ridge, but a curtain of pines and drifting snow concealed the property. They found one more object in the path, a strip of faded red fabric tangled around a broken branch. Tessa took it carefully. From Vesper's harness. Blue thread ran through the torn edge in uneven stitches. Lenora repaired this herself, Tessa said, years ago. Alden looked at the branch. The fabric had been pulled from uphill to downhill, confirming the dog had passed this way before entering the river. He pictured her moving through darkness, injured shoulder striking branches, returning again and again for the puppies. Not fleeing, evacuating. That distinction mattered. A person running from danger sought distance. A rescuer created a route. Hollis checked the time. We go back before the light drops. I'll request a full search team and medical support at first access. Alden looked toward the hidden ridge. We are close. We are on unstable ground with 4 people and no confirmed route. We lose hours. We keep 4 more people from becoming the next search. The old resistance rose in Alden before he could stop it. It was not anger at Hollis. It was the familiar conviction that procedure became cowardice when someone was waiting. Gid stepped beside him. "You called me yesterday because one set of hands wasn't enough. This is different." "No, it is only farther from shore." Alden looked at the broken harness fabric in Tessa's hand. Then he nodded. The decision tasted like failure. That was how he knew it might be the right one. Back at the cabin, evening had gathered blue against the windows. Corinne sat on the floor beside the blankets, one hand resting near Micah without touching her. The smallest puppy was awake, drinking slowly from a narrow bottle. Vesper lifted her head when Alden entered. He took off his jacket and knelt at a distance. "We found your trail," he said. Corinne glanced at him but did not interrupt. Alden placed the strip of red harness fabric on the floor. Vesper's nose moved. Her entire body went still. Then, from the direction of town, 3 low warning tones rolled faintly through the valley. The hydroelectric release signal. Vesper surged upright. Pain folded one leg beneath her, but she did not fall. She moved in front of the puppies, positioning her body across the blankets. Her ears flattened. A growl vibrated deep in her chest. Cinder woke first. Flint began scrambling backward. Micah stopped drinking. Corinne reached for the mother, then stopped. "Do not touch her." Alden remained where he was. The third tone faded. Vesper kept staring toward the north wall, breathing fast, shielding the litter. The cabin was silent except for the stove and the frightened movement of the puppies. Marin had said the signal proved nothing about the cause. She was right. But Alden no longer needed proof that Vesper had heard it before. He needed to know what came after it. And somewhere beyond the blocked road, Lenora Say had not answered for nearly a day. Northlight was not empty. The search team left Brightwater before sunrise. There was no dramatic departure, no crowd gathered outside the station. No one spoke of rescue as though the word itself could make the mountain cooperate. Sheriff Hollis Dane checked names against a clipboard beneath the yellow light of the equipment bay. Gid inspected every harness twice. Tessa loaded blankets, muzzles, collapsible water bowls, and emergency medication for the dogs still at Northlight. Marin stood at the rear of the county truck, comparing a topographic map with fresh measurements from the river gauges. Alden waited near the open door. Snow fell lightly beyond the station, fine enough to resemble dust in the headlights. He wore his old olive combat shirt beneath a waterproof rescue shell, a radio clipped high on his left shoulder. The brass whistle in his chest pocket pressed against him whenever he breathed. Corinne had arrived only to give instructions. "Vesper stays at your cabin," she said. "I know. Tessa says there are 4 adult dogs at Northlight. Do not assume they will behave like Vesper." "I know. Lenora may be hypothermic, dehydrated, crushed, bleeding, or all 4. Do not pull her free just because seeing her trapped makes you uncomfortable." Alden looked at her. Corinne held the stare. "That last one was for you." Gid coughed into one glove to hide a smile. Corinne handed Tessa a compact veterinary pack, then turned back to Alden. The smallest puppy drank again. Vesper slept for almost 2 hours without waking to count them. It was the first good news of the morning. Alden nodded once. He did not ask Corinne to call him. He knew she would. The road north narrowed after the final cluster of houses. Brightwater disappeared behind snow-heavy pines, and the valley opened into white slopes cut by dark seams of rock. The brightness of the morning made the damage ahead seem less possible. At the first closure, Hollis parked the vehicles well back from the slide. The mud had frozen overnight, giving the surface a false crust that broke under a probing pole. Beneath it, water still moved. "We go around the western shoulder," Hollis said. "No one crosses the center." Marin studied the slope. "The outer edge is longer." "It is also attached to the mountain." Gid adjusted his pack. A useful quality in a trail. They moved single file through the timber. Tessa led the first section because she knew the property boundary and the old training routes. She walked quickly but never carelessly, pausing at every break in the trees to orient herself. Northlight had once covered nearly 20 acres along a shelf above the feeder creek. Tessa described it without sentimentality: a main cabin, 2 kennel rows, an equipment barn, a small veterinary room, and a steel training tower used for rope exercises and elevated searches. "There used to be 12 working dogs," she said. "Now there are 4 adults, Vesper and the litter." "Why did it shrink?" Hollis asked. Contracts changed. County teams started building their own programs. Lenora kept taking in retired dogs and dogs other trainers gave up on. Could she afford it? Tessa's jaw tightened. Not well. That answer told Alden more than a longer explanation would have. The first evidence of Northlight appeared as a length of chain-link fencing bent downhill through the trees. Snow had filled the lower half, but mud stained the posts almost 4 feet above the ground. Marin stopped. "The surge reached here?" Alden looked upslope. "And came from the Feta, not the main river." She nodded reluctantly. "That is what the elevation suggests." Beyond the fence, the land dropped into a shallow basin. Northlight stood on the far side. The property looked less destroyed than rearranged. The main cabin remained upright on higher ground, one corner tilted where the foundation had shifted. The lower kennel row had been torn apart. Roof panels lay in the creek. A wooden storage building had collapsed toward the channel, leaving only one wall and part of the floor attached. The upper kennels were still standing. 4 dogs erupted into barking the moment the team appeared. The sound was not welcoming. It was layered with fear, hunger, and the exhausted aggression of animals that had spent a night without understanding why no one came. Tessa stopped outside the gate. "Do not approach the runs yet." She removed the red clicker from her wrist, but did not use it. Instead, she lowered her body slightly and spoke in a quiet tone that barely carried over the wind. "Easy, Rue. Easy, Bishop." One of the dogs, a large black shepherd with a gray muzzle, stopped barking first. A tan Belgian Malinois continued pacing. 2 younger shepherds pressed against the rear corners of their runs. Tessa did not reach through the wire. She sat down in the snow. The gesture seemed absurdly calm against the damage around them, but within a minute the barking lost its frantic rhythm. The black shepherd moved closer, nose working. "She trained them to wait for stillness," Alden said. Tessa kept her eyes on the dog. "Lenora trained them to recognize when stillness was real." Gid and Hollis secured the kennel area while Tessa checked each animal through the fence. The dogs were thirsty, cold, and distressed, but showed no obvious major injuries. A split water line had emptied the bowls. Gid melted snow in a portable heater while Tessa delivered water in small amounts. Alden turned toward the cabin. The front door was blocked by a fallen beam. One window had broken inward. A trail of blood crossed the porch boards and disappeared inside. Hollis followed his gaze. "We search as a team." They entered through the rear utility door. The cabin smelled of damp insulation, broken wood, and dog antiseptic. Cabinets had opened during the impact, scattering gauze, leashes, and metal bowls across the floor. A battery radio lay crushed beneath a shelf. "Lenora!" Tessa called. No answer. They moved room by room. The small veterinary space was empty. The kitchen ceiling had sagged, but held. In the hallway, a framed photograph of Vesper stood crooked on the wall, showing the dog in a red search harness beside Lenora on a summer ridge. At the end of the hall, the equipment room door had jammed halfway open. Tessa dropped to one knee. "Lenora?" A sound came from inside. Not a voice at first, a scrape. Then a breath drawn through pain. "Tess?" Tessa closed her eyes for half a second. "I'm here." The door would not move farther because a roof support had fallen across the interior. Gid shone a light through the gap. Lenora Say lay on her side, beneath the end of a timber beam. Her left leg was trapped below the knee. Snow had blown through a broken wall panel and gathered around her boots. Beside her, partly covered by a wool blanket, lay the still body of an old sable shepherd. Tessa saw the dog and stopped breathing. "Orion," she whispered. Lenora's face was gray with cold, her silver hair darkened by melted snow. Even from the doorway, Alden could see that she was conscious only through effort. "Do not come through that gap," Lenora said. "The beam shifts when the wall moves." Hollis crouched beside Tessa. "How long have you been trapped?" "Since the first surge." "Any head injury?" "No." "Bleeding?" "Not enough to be interesting." Her voice carried the dry severity of someone who considered pain an administrative inconvenience. Tessa placed one hand against the doorframe. "Where is Vesper?" Lenora's eyes moved toward her. The answer took time. "I sent her downhill." "With the puppies?" Lenora nodded. Tessa lowered her head. "They made it," Alden said. "All four." Lenora looked past Tessa toward him. For the first time, the control in her face broke. Not dramatically. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her eyes shut. "Did she keep them together?" "Yes, of course she did." The old shepherd beside her remained covered. No one asked about him yet. The room could not be entered safely until the fallen support was stabilized. Gid examined the wall, then walked outside with Marin to inspect the structure from the rear. Hollis called the medical team waiting below the closure and updated Evelyn March's office through the radio. Alden remained near the door. Lenora opened her eyes again. "You found Vesper in the river?" "Yes." "She was supposed to take the forest line." The lower trail was gone. Lenora looked toward the collapsed wall as if she could see the terrain beyond it. "She moved the carrier?" Alden nodded. One corner of her mouth tightened. Pride and grief occupied the same expression. "She tried to come back," Lenora said. Alden glanced at the trapped beam. "For you?" "For him first." Her eyes shifted toward the covered shepherd. "Orion was in the kennel beside the equipment room. The roof came down before I could open it. Vesper got through the broken window. She pulled at the blanket. Then she tried my sleeve." Lenora's voice weakened, but she continued. "I ordered her out." "You knew the forest route was damaged?" "I knew the creek was rising." "You sent her anyway?" "I sent her where the puppies had a chance." The words were not defensive. They did not ask to be forgiven. Alden looked at the dead dog under the blanket. Lenora had not chosen who mattered more. She had chosen what could still be moved. The recognition struck him with a force he had not prepared for. Before he could answer, Gid returned. "We can anchor to the training tower, but not directly. One footing shifted. We build a three-point system and keep the main load off the damaged corner." Marin followed him, snow on her shoulders. "The rear wall is carrying part of the beam. If you lift vertically, the wall may fold inward." "What direction?" Hollis asked. "Up and 6 inches east, no more." Gid opened his rope bag. Alden reached for one end. Gid held it. "Second anchor first. We have enough for the initial lift." "We have enough for the initial mistake." Alden met his eyes. Behind the jammed door, Lenora's breathing had become shallower. Every instinct in Alden demanded motion. Get inside, take the weight, pull her free before cold or shock made the decision for them. Gid did not release the rope. "Second anchor," he repeated. For one dangerous second, Alden hated him. Then a sharp crack sounded overhead. Dust fell from the hallway ceiling. The damaged wall shifted less than an inch, but the trapped beam settled harder against the floor. If Alden had already placed weight on the first line, The movement could have pulled the entire support toward Lenora. Alden looked at Gid's hand on the rope. "Second anchor," he said. They worked for 12 minutes. It felt longer. Gid built a distributed system from the training tower's stable legs and a buried tree anchor. Marin watched the wall through the broken exterior panel, calling changes in angle. Hollis controlled personnel and kept the medical team informed. Tessa crawled through the doorway only far enough to place an insulated blanket around Lenora's shoulders and check circulation above the trapped leg. Alden entered last with the lifting sling. The equipment room was colder than the rest of the cabin. Up close, Orion looked peaceful, except for the blood dried near one ear. Lenora had placed her own coat beneath the old dog's head. Alden fitted the sling around the beam. "You should have covered yourself," he said. He hated cold floors. There was nothing useful to say to that. Gid took tension on the line. The beam rose slowly. Marin's voice came through the radio. 2 inches. Hold." The wall groaned. Alden slid a cribbing block beneath the support. "Continue." The beam moved east exactly as Marin had predicted. Tessa freed Lenora's boot, then supported the injured leg while Alden pulled her clear by the rescue harness. The beam dropped onto the cribbing with a heavy thud. No one celebrated. They carried Lenora through the hallway and onto a litter outside. The winter sun had climbed above the ridge, turning the snow almost painfully bright. As the medical team prepared to move her downhill, Lenora caught Alden's sleeve. "Vesper will try to return." "She is injured." "That will not stop her from wanting to." "It will stop us from letting her." Lenora studied him, perhaps deciding whether he understood the difference. Then she released his sleeve. Marin stood near the edge of the property, looking upstream through binoculars. Her posture changed. "Hollis?" The sheriff joined her. High above Northlight, the feeder creek had widened into a dark ribbon beneath the snow. Across the narrow ravine, a mass of uprooted trees, rock, and dirty ice blocked the channel. Water pooled behind it, spreading into the timber. Marin lowered the binoculars. The surge that hit this place was only the first release. Alden followed the line of the ravine. The temporary dam looked solid from a distance. That was the danger. Nothing built by accident remained stable simply because it had not failed yet. "How much water?" Hollis asked. "I cannot estimate from here." "Best judgment." Marin kept her eyes on the obstruction. "Enough that if it lets go all at once, Northlight will not be the emergency anymore." Below them, the 4 surviving dogs began barking again. This time the sound carried downhill toward Brightwater. Loyalty does not mean returning to the same place. Lenora Say's hospital room faced north. The window was narrow, set high in the wall, and showed only a strip of white mountains above the roof of the Brightwater clinic. Snowmelt ran down the glass in thin lines, bending the view whenever the afternoon sun touched them. Lenora had asked twice for the bed to be turned toward that window. The nurses had refused twice. Her left leg rested in a rigid brace from ankle to thigh. A fracture below the knee had been stabilized, but swelling still pressed hard beneath the bandages. One forearm carried an intravenous line. The silver hair she usually wore, combed back, had dried unevenly around her face, making her look less like the woman who had built Northlight, and more like someone temporarily separated from the force that usually held her upright. She disliked both impressions. Tessa stood near the foot of the bed with a folder of veterinary reports. She had already told Lenora about the 4 adult dogs, the damage to the upper kennel row, and Orion's body being moved from the cabin. She had not yet spoken about Vesper. Lenora noticed. "You keep turning that page without reading it." Tessa stopped. "The puppies are stable." "That was not what I asked." "No, it was what I was ready to answer." Lenora's fingers tightened around the blanket. A knock came at the door. Alden entered carrying a transport crate with Micah inside. Corinne followed, one hand on Vesper's leash and the other holding a canvas medical bag. The larger dog walked slowly between them, each step deliberate. A wide bandage covered the injury on her left shoulder. Her right hind leg remained stiff, and exhaustion had narrowed her normally alert expression. Corinne paused before crossing the threshold. 5 minutes, she said. No excitement, no standing on furniture, no dramatic reunions for the benefit of human expectations. Lenora looked at her. Do you give everyone orders in their own hospital room? Only people with a documented history of ignoring them. Tessa stepped aside. Vesper entered. For the first time since Alden had met her, the dog seemed uncertain. She recognized the room's antiseptic smell, the clinic carts, and the muted sounds from the hallway. Her ears moved toward each noise, but her eyes remained on Lenora. Lenora did not call her. She placed one hand open on the blanket and waited. Vesper crossed the room in 3 slow steps. She raised her muzzle to the edge of the bed, inhaled, and pressed her forehead into Lenora's palm. Lenora closed her fingers around the fur behind the torn ear. No one spoke. The contact lasted only a few seconds, but something passed through it that words would have made smaller. Confirmation, apology, recognition, and the relief of finding a familiar life where death had been expected. Lenora touched 2 fingers to the dog's chest below the collar, the old signal she used instead of affection performed for others. You followed the right order, she said. Vesper's tail moved once. Then Micah cried from inside the crate. The sound was not loud. It was a small, impatient complaint from a puppy who had been carried farther than she approved of. Vesper lifted her head immediately. She turned from Lenora, moved toward the crate, and stood beside it. Her body positioned itself between Micah and the open doorway. Only after sniffing through the wire did she look back at the bed. Lenora watched the movement. Tessa's eyes lowered, as if she expected hurt. Instead, Lenora gave a quiet breath that might have been a laugh if it had contained more air. She chose correctly again. Alden stood near the wall. She didn't choose against you. I know. Lenora looked at Vesper and then at the crate. People make loyalty too narrow. They want it to be a rope tied to one post. She leaned back against the pillow, pain tightening the corners of her mouth. A good dog knows when the ground has changed. The words settled differently in Alden than she intended. He looked toward the window. Far beyond the clinic roof, water was gathering behind the accidental dam above Northlight. Crews had placed remote gauges along the feeder creek, but the first complete readings would not arrive until evening. Evelyn March had ordered a preliminary evacuation review for the lower district. Marin Locke was at the emergency operations room, reconstructing the sequence of the release and the slope failure. The danger had become larger than the rescue that revealed it. But Alden's attention remained on Vesper. The dog loved Lenora. That was obvious in the softness around her eyes, in the way she held her injured body closer to the bed than comfort allowed. Yet when Micah called, Vesper went where she was needed now. Alden had spent years believing love required a fixed direction. The dead behind you, the living ahead. Loyalty to one meant betrayal of the other. Vesper seemed to understand a more difficult truth. Responsibility could move without erasing what came before. Corinne checked the clock. Time! Lenora's hand moved once more to Vesper's ear. Go with them. Vesper remained still. Lenora repeated the hand signal, smaller this time. The dog turned and followed Alden out. She did not look back from the doorway. Lenora did. The emergency operations room occupied the second floor of the Brightwater fire station. It had been built for wildfires, not water, and maps of forest roads still covered one wall beneath new sheets showing the Elkstone watershed. By late afternoon, the room smelled of coffee, wet wool, and printer heat. Marin stood at the main table, surrounded by photographs, sensor logs, and topographic overlays. Without her field jacket, she looked smaller, but not less severe. The silver streak at her temple had come loose from the knot at the back of her head. Calder Voss stood opposite her. He was 54, compact and square-bodied, with close-cut brown hair graying at the sides, and the reddened hands of a man who spent more time around machinery than desks. His work coat carried the Brightwater hydroelectric insignia and a smear of black grease near one cuff. Nothing in his posture suggested corruption or panic. He looked like someone defending a system because people depended on it, and because he knew exactly how much could fail when it stopped. Sheriff Hollis introduced Alden only with a gesture. Calder looked at him. "You are the one who found the dogs?" "Yes." "And you were at Northlight?" "Yes." Calder turned back to the table. "Then you know the feeder creek failed before the plant released its peak." Marin's expression tightened. "We do not know that yet." "We know the main gate never exceeded the approved curve." "The approved curve assumes all upper gauges are functioning. 2 were. 1 was not." Calder spread one hand over the records. "If we shut the plant every time a remote unit loses communication, Brightwater freezes every winter." No one answered immediately because the statement was not empty. The plant supplied power to the clinic, the nursing home, and much of the East Valley. Backup generators existed, but some were old, some poorly maintained, and none designed to replace the entire grid for long. Marin moved a transparent overlay across the map. "The problem is not simply the volume released. The thaw cycle increased pore pressure in the slope. The release raised the main channel and reduced drainage from the feeder. The slope failed into a confined ravine." Calder looked at the map. "So the hillside caused the surge. The hillside failed under conditions our model did not include." "That is not the same as the plant causing it." "No," Marin said. "It is also not the same as the plant having no role." The room went quiet. Alden watched Calder absorb the distinction. Anger would have been easier for him than uncertainty. Anger gave a person something to push against. Uncertainty required standing still while responsibility changed shape. The door opened. Evelyn March entered, carrying a thick binder under one arm. She was 61, tall and spare, with silver-black hair cut to the jaw and square glasses that gave nothing away. Her county emergency jacket was zipped to the throat. She did not hurry, but everyone in the room adjusted when she arrived. "Current assessment," she said. Marin pointed to the upper ravine. "The debris mass spans approximately 60 feet, rock, timber, and ice. Water is pooling behind it and expanding into the forest shelf. Failure window? Unknown. Range? Could hold 2 days. Could fail tonight." Evelyn looked at Calder. "Plant status? Operating at reduced output. If we shut down fully, the east feeder line may not support peak heating demand. Backup generation? Clinic has 8 hours at full load. Nursing home claims 12, but I do not trust the fuel estimate." Evelyn made a note. "Population below the flood line?" Hollis answered, 183 residents, 26 livestock properties, 2 commercial buildings. Alden studied the map. The water would not strike every property equally. It would follow the old channel first, then spread into the low district near the rail bridge. Marin placed another sheet over the first. "There are 3 viable responses." She outlined them carefully. Wait for the state engineering team and attempt controlled removal from above. Increase discharge through the existing system and lower the main channel, risking additional pressure changes at the temporary dam. Or reopen an abandoned diversion channel that once carried spring runoff around the western edge of Brightwater. Evelyn's finger followed the third route. It crosses Northlight. "And the historical North Span Bridge," Marin said. "The channel is partially obstructed but still intact beneath the snow." Calder looked toward her. "Opening it would require taking the plant offline. For several hours. And if the diversion fails? Then we lose North Light and still receive the surge in the main channel. What happens if it works?" Marin did not soften the answer. "North Light is destroyed. The lower meadow floods. North Span likely has to be removed. The town receives a slower, divided flow." Alden pictured the cabin, the upper kennels, and Orion beneath the blanket. They had saved Lenora from one collapsing room only to discover that preserving the property itself might endanger everyone below it. Evelyn closed the binder. "We are not making that decision tonight. We collect measurements, inspect the diversion, and prepare evacuation options." Calder frowned. "Every hour the plant stays reduced creates another risk." "So does pretending only one kind of failure matters," Evelyn said. She assigned tasks without raising her voice. Hollis would map evacuation zones and transportation needs. Calder would verify backup power capacity at the clinic and nursing home. Marin would prepare a failure model using the newest elevation data. County crews would inspect the old diversion from both ends. Then Evelyn looked at Alden. "You are not in command here." "I know." "Good. That saves time." "I can assess the old channel on foot." "Only as part of a team." Alden nodded. The absence of resistance surprised him, perhaps because he had spent the day watching loyalty change direction without becoming less true. He returned to the clinic after dark. Lenora was awake, though pain medication had softened her focus. Tessa sat near the window with Orion's faded leather collar in her lap. Someone from the rescue team had cleaned the mud from it. Alden told Lenora about the accidental dam and the diversion route. He did not disguise what reopening it would mean. "The lower kennels are already gone," she said. "The rest would follow." "The cabin?" "Yes." "The training tower?" "Probably." Tessa looked at her. "You do not have to answer tonight." Lenora's gaze moved to Orion's collar. "I built North Light because county teams kept treating dogs like equipment. I thought if I owned the ground, I could protect the work." She rubbed one thumb across the edge of the blanket. "Then I spent years protecting the ground." Alden waited. "Do they need my permission?" "For the property, yes. Not for the bridge or the channel itself. The county will make those decisions." Lenora looked toward the north window. "Then tell Evelyn she has access to inspect everything. No promises beyond that." It was not surrender. It was the first loosening of a hand that had held too long. When Alden returned home, Vesper was awake beside the stove. Cinder and Flint slept tangled against her belly. Micah lay separately in a padded basket near Corinne's chair, still needing extra feeding. Alden sat on the floor several feet away. Vesper watched him. He removed the brass whistle from his pocket and turned it between his fingers. The metal had darkened with age, except where his thumb had polished one side. Years earlier, aboard the USS Mercer, fire had broken through a machinery compartment after an electrical explosion. Alden had been the officer coordinating containment. One technician had not reported out. Smoke pressure was rising. The sealed boundary was failing. If Alden delayed, fire and toxic gas could reach the berthing spaces beyond. He had ordered the watertight door closed. 37 sailors survived the night. Evan Rusk did not. Investigators had called the decision correct. Command had praised Alden's discipline. Evan's family had thanked him for saving the others. None of it changed the sound of the closing mechanism. Alden had carried that sound longer than he had carried any metal. Vesper rose stiffly and crossed the floor. She did not touch the whistle. She lowered her head and rested her forehead against Alden's knee. The pressure was light, almost formal. Alden closed his hand around the old brass. "I thought staying loyal meant never leaving that door," he said. Vesper remained there. Across the room, Micah made a small sound in her sleep. Vesper lifted her head, checked the basket, and returned to Alden only after the puppy settled. Not one place, not one duty, not one life held forever at the expense of every life still calling. Outside, snow began to fall again over Brightwater. High in the ravine, water pressed silently against a wall of rock, timber, and ice. Inside, Alden opened his hand. For the first time in years, the whistle did not feel like evidence against him. It felt like a tool he had not yet decided how to use. No one gets to use Vesper as an excuse for hate. By 9 the next morning, the Brightwater fire station had run out of chairs. Ranchers stood against the walls in wet boots. Business owners crowded near the equipment lockers. Residents from the lower district held folded evacuation notices they had not yet been ordered to obey. Snow melted from coats and collected in gray pools across the concrete floor. At the front of the room, a large map of the Elkstone watershed had been pinned over the station's wildfire board. A red line marked the possible flood corridor. A blue line showed the abandoned diversion channel. The two lines crossed at Northlight. Alden stood near the back with Gid. He had no title written on the table placards, no official authority, and no desire to be mistaken for the man who would solve the room. That did not stop people from turning toward him. The story had already moved faster than the facts. By breakfast, half of Brightwater knew a retired Navy officer had pulled a wounded canine and 3 puppies from the river. By mid-morning, the telling had become cleaner and more useful than truth. The plant had opened a gate. The dogs had nearly died. Therefore, someone at the plant had tried to bury a mistake. Alden heard the conclusion passed from one row to another in low voices. People preferred a straight line when fear had made everything else crooked. Evelyn March stood at the central table, waiting until the room quieted without asking for silence. She wore the same county emergency jacket as the day before, zipped high at the throat. Her square glasses sat low enough for her to look over them when someone spoke out of turn. Sheriff Hollis Dane stood to her right. Marin Locke occupied the other side of the map, a stack of technical reports arranged precisely before her. Calder Voss sat at the end of the table, jaw tight, hands clasped over a notebook from the hydroelectric plant. Lenora joined through a video screen propped on a crate. The clinic had placed her upright against several pillows. Her injured leg was out of view, but fatigue showed in the way she held her shoulders. Tessa sat beside her, holding Orion's cleaned collar in her lap. Evelyn began with the facts. The temporary debris dam above Northlight continues to hold. Water is rising behind it. We do not have a reliable failure time. A man near the front raised his hand without waiting to be recognized. Then open the old channel. His name was Owen Lark, owner of a feed store in the lower district. He was broad-faced and flushed from heat inside the station. Marin answered before Evelyn could. The diversion channel has not carried a full spring load in 43 years. It contains trees, unstable banks, and a bridge constriction. Opening it without preparation could redirect the surge into the western neighborhood. So prepare it. That is what the field inspection is for. A woman from the Historical Society stood beside him. North Span is protected. A rancher behind her laughed once. Protected from what? Water? Protected from demolition. It'll be driftwood if that dam breaks. The room began dividing itself. Lower district residents wanted the diversion opened immediately. Members of the Historical Society wanted proof that the bridge could not be saved. Ranchers worried about cattle in the western meadow. Workers from the hydroelectric plant feared losing power during the coldest week of the month. Calder rose. If we take the plant completely offline before backup generation is secured, the clinic and nursing home will be on limited fuel. So will several heating stations. Owen Lark pointed toward Marin. Your people caused this. Marin did not move. The plant contributed to the conditions surrounding the slope failure.
That is not the same as saying one release caused the entire event.
Tell that to the dog. The sentence changed the room. A murmur moved through the crowd. Someone near the side called Vesper proof that the plant knew more than it admitted. Another voice demanded Marin be removed from the planning team. A third said the puppies should be brought to the meeting so everyone could see what approved limits looked like. Alden felt Gid turn toward him. He stayed where he was. For several seconds, Alden watched fear search for a face it could punish. Marin's expression remained controlled, but one hand had tightened around her mechanical pencil. Calder looked ready to defend the plant with more force than persuasion. Evelyn appeared willing to let the room exhaust itself. Then Alden stepped forward. Vesper is not evidence of intent. The voices faded unevenly. Owen looked at him. You found her? Yes. You saw what happened. I saw a dog trying to keep her puppies alive. And you think that means nothing? It means exactly what it means. Alden walked no farther than the edge of the seated crowd. Vesper did not enter that river so this town could use her as a weapon against whoever we are most afraid of today. She did not protect those puppies to give us permission to stop thinking. No one interrupted. The plant's decisions have to be examined. The failed sensor has to be examined. The old flood map has to be examined. But if you turn one injured dog into proof of every accusation you already wanted to make, you are not honoring what she did. He glanced toward the video screen. Lenora was watching him. You are borrowing her pain, because anger is easier to carry than uncertainty. Owen's face hardened. People could die. Yes. Alden let the answer stand. That is why we cannot afford to lie to ourselves in either direction. He returned to his place beside Gid. There was no applause. Alden was grateful for that. Evelyn waited another moment, then pointed to the map. We will proceed with preparation for the diversion while continuing to evaluate all alternatives. Calder leaned forward. That is not authorization to shut down the plant. No, it is authorization to stop pretending we can decide after the dam fails. She outlined the required conditions. The lower district would enter voluntary evacuation status immediately. Hollis would identify residents who needed transport, including adults with limited mobility and people dependent on medical equipment. Calder would confirm working backup generators and actual fuel levels rather than estimates. Marin would lead the technical inspection of the diversion gate and north span. County crews would begin clearing light debris from the old channel without altering the banks. Only after power, evacuation, and structural conditions were verified would Evelyn consider opening the diversion. The meeting shifted from argument to assignments. Fear did not disappear. It acquired a clipboard. At Northlight, the winter sun made the ruins look almost clean. Snow had softened the broken kennel roofs and buried much of the mud. Only the twisted fence posts and brown water stains revealed how violently the property had changed. Tessa arrived with the first animal transport trailer. Corinne followed in her clinic truck, bringing Vesper and the puppies only because the animals needed to be moved away from Alden's cabin if evacuation orders expanded toward the East Road. Vesper was not there to work. Corinne said it 3 times before letting the dog step down. Alden understood why. The moment Vesper saw Northlight, her body changed. Her head lifted. Her injured shoulder tightened beneath the bandage. She looked toward the cabin, then the lower kennels, then the slope where the puppy tracks had once crossed the snow. Tessa approached from the side. Easy? Vesper did not pull against the leash. She simply stood and breathed in what remained. The 4 adult dogs in the upper kennels began barking. The Belgian Malinois paced in tight circles, striking one shoulder against the wire. Rue, the black shepherd with the gray muzzle, remained at the gate, but would not step through when Tessa opened it. Tessa sat in the snow as she had the day before. Vesper watched her. Then Vesper lowered herself several yards from the kennel entrance. She did not look directly at Rue. She did not bark or offer a command. She placed her chin on her front paws and became still. Rue stopped pacing. The other dogs followed more slowly. Alden watched from beside the transport trailer. Vesper was not leading them through obedience. She was lending them a nervous system calmer than their own. When Rue finally stepped into the open run, Tessa clipped on a leash and guided him toward the trailer. Vesper rose only after he passed. She checked the crate holding Micah, Cinder, and Flint, then returned to the kennels for the second dog.
Corinne caught Alden watching. She gets 3 minutes, then she rests. She is barely moving. Work is not measured only in distance. After the second dog was loaded, Corinne ended the session. Vesper resisted for one step, then heard Micah crying from the crate and turned back without being forced. Lenora had been right. The ground had changed. So had the work. Near the old diversion channel, Marin supervised a county survey crew. The channel appeared as a broad depression through the trees, half filled with snow and young lodgepole pines. Rusted gate hardware protruded from a stone retaining wall near the creek. North span crossed the lower section. The bridge was narrower than Alden expected, built from heavy timber beams resting on stone abutments. Its planks were weathered silver. A faded sign warned vehicles over 5 tons to use the newer county road. Marin knelt beside a metal housing, partly buried in ice. "The gate is still here?" Gid looked down the channel.
Still moving? That is a different question. A crew member chipped ice away from the housing while Marin studied old maintenance drawings. The bridge presented the greater problem. Its center span occupied nearly half the available channel width. If released water struck the structure carrying ice and trees, the bridge could become a debris trap. A Historical Society representative named Miriam Vale accompanied the inspection. She was in her late 60s, small beneath a long burgundy coat, with white hair braided tightly down her back. She had spent 20 years raising funds to preserve North Span, and spoke of each beam as though it had a biography. "This bridge survived 3 floods." Marin looked beneath the deck. "Not a debris-dammed failure." "You cannot know that removing it will help." "No. I can model that leaving it creates a high probability of blockage." Miriam turns to Alden. "And what does the Navy say?" Alden looked at the bridge. "The Navy says I am not a bridge engineer." Marin gave him the briefest glance of appreciation. Gid crouched beside one abutment. "These pins are not original." Marin joined him. Large steel locking pins connected the timber span to brackets installed during a restoration decades earlier. According to the faded plans, they had been designed so the center span could be lifted for major maintenance. Not demolished. Moved. Marin traced the old cable route with one finger. "If the pins release and we bring in 2 hydraulic winches, we may be able to rotate the span toward the western bank." Miriam stepped closer. "Without destroying it?" "Without guaranteeing it survives." "That is not the same thing." "No," Marin said. "It is the best honest answer I have." Alden looked upstream. The temporary dam remained hidden beyond the ravine, but the feeder creek had grown darker and faster since morning. A low vibration traveled through the stone beneath his boots. Not enough to shake the bridge. Enough to feel. Marin felt it too. She stood and checked the handheld gauge. The reading had risen again. At that moment, Hollis's voice came over the radio. "Emergency operations to field team. Nursing home generator failed its load test. Repeat, failed under full load." Calder answered from the station. "The replacement unit is at the county depot." "How long?" 3 hours if the road stays open." Snow had begun falling again. Marin looked at the channel, then at the bridge, then toward Northlight, where Vesper lay beside the transport crate. No one said what the failed generator meant.
They could not shut down the plant. They could not safely open the diversion while the plant remained fully active. And the temporary dam did not care which necessary condition had failed first. By late afternoon, the Northlight cabin had been emptied of medical supplies, records, and portable equipment. Tessa packed training logs into waterproof bins. Gid removed unsecured wire panels from the projected flood route. County crews anchored bundles of heavier timber to steel stakes rather than leaving them loose. Lenora appeared on a video call from the clinic to approve the final inventory. Tessa carried the phone through the damaged training room. "This is what we saved." Leashes, veterinary records, search maps, a box of collars, Lenora's hand signals written in old notebooks. Orion's ashes would come later, after the county completed the required handling. Lenora looked at the bare walls. "Take the tower pulleys. They are mounted. Then unmount them." Tessa smiled despite herself. "You are in a hospital bed. I am still capable of recognizing useful equipment." Near the end of the call, Evelyn entered the frame from the fire station and asked the formal question. "Mrs. Say, do you grant the county emergency access to alter structures and terrain on your property if required to protect life?" Lenora looked past the camera, perhaps toward the high northern window. "Yes." "Do you understand this may result in the destruction of the remaining Northlight facilities?" "Yes." Tessa closed her eyes briefly. Lenora continued, "But no one copies the old kennel layout afterward." Evelyn paused. "Explain." "It was built for the creek we used to have." The answer moved through the room more quietly than grief. Evelyn recorded the consent. Alden stood outside afterward while the first transport trailer left Northlight. Vesper lay inside near the puppies, exhausted but alert. Through the mesh, her amber eyes followed the shrinking buildings. Alden expected her to rise. She did not. She touched her nose to each puppy in turn and settled beside them. Northlight had been her home. It was no longer the place that needed her most. Over the radio, Calder confirmed the replacement generator had begun its trip from the depot. Hollis ordered the voluntary evacuation upgraded for the first 3 streets in the lower district. Marin remained at the gate mechanism, testing whether the frozen balancing valve could move without placing pressure on the main lock. The plan was not approved. The bridge was not secured. The nursing home still depended on a machine traveling through worsening snow. Yet for the first time, everyone was working from the same truth. They might not be able to save every structure. They might not be able to prevent every loss. But no one would be allowed to protect one piece of Brightwater by pretending the rest did not matter. Above the valley, hidden by snow and trees, water continued rising behind the accidental dam. And below it, the town began making room for what it might have to surrender. The gate had to open. The replacement generator reached Brightwater just after midnight. It came through the snow behind 2 county plows, chained to a flatbed and covered in blue canvas that snapped in the wind. Gid rode in the lead truck with one hand braced against the dashboard and the other around a radio. By the time the convoy reached the nursing home, ice had formed along his beard stubble, and the coffee in his dented cobalt cup had gone cold. Calder Voss was waiting beside the service entrance. He did not greet anyone. "Fuel first," he said, "then transfer switch, then full load." No one argued. The generator had to prove it could carry the heating system, medical equipment, kitchen refrigeration, and emergency lighting at the same time. Calder refused to count a successful idle test as reassurance. For 43 minutes, the machine roared beneath the falling snow. Inside, the nursing home remained warm. At the clinic, the smaller backup unit passed its second load test. Only then did Calder authorize the hydroelectric plant to reduce output to emergency minimum. At the fire station,
Evelyn March marked the condition complete with one line through her checklist. "Power contingency secured," she said. Marin stood over the river model, eyes fixed on a series of readings updating too quickly. "The dam is moving." The room changed at once. Not panic, acceleration. The latest gauge showed water overtopping the lowest section of the debris mass. Pressure was cutting channels through the ice and soil. No model could now justify waiting for the state engineering team. Evelyn looked at Hollis. "Mandatory evacuation for all zones below the old rail embankment." He was already reaching for the radio. She turned to Marin. "Diversion readiness?" "Gate access cleared. Balancing valve partially responsive. Main lock frozen but exposed. North span rigged with 2 hydraulic winches." "Failure points?" "The left abutment may shear if the span rotates unevenly." The main gate could kick backward if pressure is not balanced first. "Can you operate it?" Marin looked at the map, then at the river readings. "Yes." Evelyn held her gaze. That was not a question about confidence. Marin inhaled slowly. "I know the mechanism. I inspected it during the county survey 12 years ago. I can operate it if the housing has not deformed beyond what we saw today." Evelyn nodded once. "Then we proceed." Alden stood near the equipment rack with a harness in his hands. He had spent years avoiding rooms in which one sentence could change the number of people who returned home. Yet no one looked to him for permission. That should have relieved him. Instead, it left him with nowhere to hide from the fact that he had chosen to stay. North Light looked different beneath work lights. The broken buildings, snow-covered kennels, and dark trees had lost the distance daylight gave them. Every surface seemed closer, harsher, and temporary. County crews had cleared a narrow access lane to the diversion gate. Ropes ran between steel posts driven into frozen ground. Hydraulic lines crossed the snow beneath protective mats. The center span of North Span had been rigged with cables leading to 2 winches on the western bank. Vesper and the Puppies were not supposed to be there. Corinne had moved them to a heated transport unit parked well beyond the projected flood corridor because the east road near Alden's cabin had entered the evacuation zone. Tessa remained with them and the 4 adult North-like dogs. Alden saw Vesper once through the trailer mesh. She lay beside the Puppies with her bandaged shoulder facing away from the door. Her amber eyes followed the movement of people and machines, but she did not rise. That mattered more than Alden expected. For once, a living creature with every instinct to intervene was being allowed to remain safe. Gid tightened the rescue harness around Alden's waist. "Say the plan." Alden looked toward the gate. "Marin crosses to the control housing. Primary line through the tower anchor, back up through the western post system. I remain at the midpoint platform and monitor the gate face, cable angle, and upstream flow. You control both lines from the bank." "Who gives the order to move?" "Evelyn." "Who stops the operation?" "Anyone who sees an unsafe change." Gid pulled each connection 3 times. "Good." Marin approached wearing a white helmet, flotation jacket, and twin lanyards clipped to the overhead safety line. Snow had collected in the loose silver streak near her temple. "The balancing valve requires 6 turns," she said. "If the pressure gauge drops below 40, I pull the secondary pin. If it stays above 40, I stop." Alden nodded. "And if the main lock releases early?" "You get flat against the stone wall." "That was not in your first explanation." "It is in the improved version." For a moment, neither smiled. Then Hollis's radio cracked with a report from the upper survey team. The debris dam had begun shedding timber. Evelyn's voice followed. "Field team, commence." Marin clipped onto the first line and crossed North Span. The bridge moved beneath her boots. Not much, but enough for Alden to see the lanterns along the railing shift out of alignment. At the stone housing, she knelt and cleared ice from the access plate. Gid fed slack. Alden moved to the midpoint platform, where he could see both the gate and the dark channel above it. Marin inserted the crank. The first turn resisted. The second produced a metallic groan from inside the wall. "Pressure," Alden called. 62. She turned again. Water hissed through the narrow bypass channel. 58. Upstream, the creek's surface rose against the gate and folded back on itself. Marin completed the sixth turn. 47. "Hold," Alden said. They waited. The gauge needle trembled. 45. 43. Then it stopped. Marin looked toward him. Not low enough. Alden studied the gate face. Water had begun leaking through the lower seam, carrying dark soil and fragments of bark. Could the valve be blocked? Partially. Can you clear it? Not from this side without opening the housing. The housing sat only 3 feet from the pressurized gate mechanism. Gid's voice came through the radio. "No improvising." Marin ignored the tone, not the instruction. "If I cannot lower the pressure, we cannot release the main pin." A deep vibration rolled down the channel. The steel cable above Alden began to hum. Everyone looked upstream. A line of water appeared between the trees, spreading across the snow above the accidental dam. It was no longer only seeping through. It was overtopping. Evelyn came over the radio. "Estimated time?" Marin looked at the gauge. "Unknown. Best operational judgment. Minutes to significant breach. Maybe less." The words landed without drama because there was no room left for any. Evelyn answered, "Proceed only within established limits." Marin opened the access housing. Inside, ice had formed around the valve linkage. She used a short steel tool to chip at it, working from the side while remaining behind the stone barrier. Alden watched the gate face. The lower seam widened. Then a sound came from behind the equipment shed, not machinery, a shout. One of the county workers had been removing unsecured fencing beyond the main rigging area. A section of old kennel panel had collapsed under accumulated snow, knocking him into a shallow drainage trench. Mud and water rushed around his shoulders while the twisted frame pinned one leg. Tessa ran from the transport area before anyone could stop her. Vesper moved faster. The trailer door had been opened so Tessa could transfer a water bowl. The dog slipped past her, bandage bright against the dark saddle of her coat. "Vesper!" Corinne shouted. The shepherd did not run toward Alden or the gate. She went directly toward the trapped worker. Alden saw her reach the edge of the trench and stop. The unstable mud prevented her from getting close enough to pull at the man without falling in. She barked. Once. Twice. Then she looked toward Gid. He understood. Gid grabbed a lightweight messenger line, clipped it to a rescue rope, and threw the padded end across the trench. It landed short. Vesper stepped into the mud. Her injured shoulder dipped, but she caught the messenger line in her mouth and carried it the final few feet to the worker. "Clip it to your chest harness," Gid called. The man's hands shook too badly. Vesper moved beside him, bracing her body against the bank. He looped the rope through the front of his vest, while Hollis and 2 workers pulled from stable ground. The kennel panel shifted. Vesper lowered herself into the water, pressing her shoulder and chest beside the man's head so his face stayed above the muddy flow. The injured shoulder reopened. A dark line spread through the bandage. Alden took 1 step away from the midpoint platform. The primary line snapped tight against his harness. Marin was still at the gate. If he left, no one would be watching the gate angle or the cable line from his position. Vesper looked toward him across the work lights, not calling him, not asking to be rescued. She had chosen the person closest to drowning. Alden stopped. "Hollis has her," Gid said over the radio. "Stay on your station." The old instinct tore at him, the need to go where the pain was most visible, even if leaving created another danger no one could see yet. He forced his attention back to Marin. Gauge. 41. Again. 40. The frozen linkage broke free with a sharp crack. The needle fell. 38. Marin reached for the secondary pin. Releasing. The pin came loose. The gate shifted half an inch and slammed back against the lock. Alden saw the cable jerk. Flat! Marin pressed herself against the stone housing as the gate mechanism kicked outward. The steel arms swept through the space where her shoulder had been. The main lock cracked, but did not release. At the trench, the rescue team freed the worker's leg. Hollis pulled him onto firm ground. Tessa reached Vesper and wrapped both arms around the dog's chest, while Corinne compressed the bleeding shoulder. Vesper tried to rise. Corinne held her down. No more. This time, even the dog had nothing left with which to disagree. Tessa and Hollis carried her toward the medical trailer. Alden did not watch them leave. He watched the gate. A column of water appeared above the channel. The accidental dam was beginning to fail. The main lock had warped under pressure. Marin struck it once with a dead-blow hammer. Nothing. Again. The lower section shifted, but the upper catch remained fixed. "The gate will not open fully," she said. "How much clearance?" Alden asked. "Maybe 30%. Not enough. A partial opening would concentrate the surge into a narrow jet, cutting the diversion bank and potentially redirecting water toward the western neighborhood. Marin looked toward North Span. "If we remove the center span now, we can gain channel width, but the gate still has to move." Gid checked the hydraulic pressure on the winches. "Bridge rig is ready." Evelyn's voice came through. "Confirm authority sequence?" Hollis answered first. "Evacuation zones clear." Marin followed. "Removing the bridge reduces blockage risk. Leaving it creates an unacceptable debris capture probability." Lenora's recorded property consent had already been confirmed. The county engineer approved removal of the movable span under emergency authority. Evelyn gave the order. "Release North Span." The winches engaged. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the steel pins began sliding from the brackets. The old timber bridge groaned as though protesting the loss of its own weight. One pin cleared. The other jammed halfway. The left winch pulled harder. The bridge twisted. Marin looked up. "Stop! Uneven load!" Gid cut the winches. The center span hung at an angle above the channel, more dangerous than before. Upstream, trees broke free from the debris dam. Alden heard them before he saw them. Trunks striking rock, branches snapping, water carrying weight that no human mechanism could politely resist. His vision narrowed. The work lights became white glare. The groan of the bridge changed into the mechanical howl of a watertight door. Snow became smoke. The radio at his shoulder became the alarm aboard the Mercer. One man still inside. 37 behind the boundary. Close it. Do not close it. Choose. Alden's hands stopped responding. "Alden!" Gid's voice came through the radio. He could not answer. "Alden Crowther! Look at the western anchor!" His eyes found the steel post. "Tell me what you see." Alden swallowed. "Cable. Under tension. Angle. Too steep. Gate face? Lower seam open. Main lock holding upper right. Where are you?" The question was simple enough to cross the years. "North Light." Again. "North Light, Colorado." "Who is at the gate?" "Marin." "Who gives the order?" "Evelyn." The world returned in pieces. Snow, stone, cold air. A bridge hanging crooked over a channel. No closed compartment, no unseen sailor waiting behind steel. Alden opened his hand. The fingers moved. He studied the gate mechanism. The lock is binding because the gate is loaded unevenly. Marin looked toward him. If the bridge span shifts west, the channel pressure may pull the gate face left. Enough to free the catch?
Possibly. Or tear the hinge? Yes. There was no clean answer. Alden reported the condition to Evelyn. He did not phrase it as a command. Marin confirmed the structural risk. Gid confirmed the winch could reverse the span toward the west bank. Hollis reconfirmed the evacuation perimeter.
Evelyn listened to each of them. Then she made the decision. Shift the bridge west. Prepare for gate release. The winches restarted, one pulling while the other paid out under control. The jammed span rotated toward the bank. As its weight changed, the diversion channel opened wider. The gate shuddered. The upper lock tore free. Marin threw herself behind the stone wall as the gate swung open. Water entered the old channel with a sound too large to belong to any one place. The first surge struck the lower bank, broke against the anchored timber and spread across the sacrificial meadow. Roda held the main bend. One cabled bundle tore free, but the steel stakes kept it from becoming a projectile. North Span's center section collapsed onto the western bank, splintering 2 deck beams but leaving the channel mostly open. Then the debris dam failed. Brown water, ice, and uprooted trees descended through Northlight. The lower ruins vanished first. The remaining cabin tilted, held for several seconds, and broke apart. The training tower folded toward the creek. Empty kennels disappeared beneath foam and timber. Alden watched from the safety line. No one cheered. The diverted flow filled the old channel, spread through the empty meadow, and reached Brightwater as a broad, slower flood instead of a vertical wall. 2 houses took water through their lower floors. Fencing and several cattle from an evacuated pasture were lost. The trapped worker was transported with a broken leg and cold exposure. Vesper was taken directly to Corinne's clinic for emergency surgery. The plant remained at minimum output. The nursing home stayed warm. The clinic lights did not fail. And when Hollis completed the first personnel count, every name answered. Alden stood beneath the work lights after the worst of the surge passed. The channel still carried black water through the place Northlight had occupied. Marin approached, helmet beneath one arm.
You froze. Yes. You came back. Because Gid brought me back. She nodded. There was no shame in her expression, and no admiration either. Only recognition. They had not survived because one person remained unbreakable. They had survived because failure in one person, one machine, or one plan had not been allowed to become the only thing holding everyone else. Across the valley, dawn began to thin the darkness. Northlight was gone. Brightwater was damaged. Vesper was alive, though no one yet knew what the reopened wound would cost her. Alden looked at the water moving through the channel they had chosen to sacrifice. For years, he had believed responsibility meant carrying every consequence alone. Now he understood something harder. Responsibility also meant allowing other people to hold the line when your own hands stopped working.
A place that should not be rebuilt the same way. Brightwater did not wake to victory. It woke to pumps, to wet drywall being cut away from 2 houses in the lower district, to cattle trailers moving slowly along roads lined with broken fencing, to crews measuring silt inside basements and checking bridge abutments beneath a sky so clear it seemed unaware of what the night had done. Northlight was gone. From the ridge, the property looked like a pale wound cut through the snow. The main cabin had broken apart and lodged against a stand of trees farther downstream. One section of the training tower remained above the mud, tilted toward the creek. The old center span of North Span rested against the western bank, 2 deck beams split but still attached to the winch cables. The diversion channel continued to carry dark water through the sacrificial meadow. No one called it beautiful. No one called it a miracle. The town had survived because enough imperfect things had worked at the same time. Alden stood beside Hollis near the edge of the damaged road while county crews completed the final search. Every resident had been accounted for. The injured worker was in surgery for a fractured leg. 3 cattle had been lost from an evacuated pasture, and several more were still being gathered from higher ground. Gid approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Alden. "You look disappointed." Alden watched a crew mark the unstable slope with red flags. "At what?" "That nobody is asking you to pose beside the wreckage." "I can arrange to look more heroic." "You would need different trousers." Alden looked down at the brown combat pants streaked with dried mud. The humor did not erase the night. It gave the morning somewhere to begin. Gid drank from his dented blue cup. "Corinne called." Alden turned too quickly. "Vesper is out of surgery." "Alive?" "Yes." The single word struck harder than any speech could have. "Damage?" "More torn muscle around the shoulder. No major nerve injury. She will walk normally if she heals well." "If?" Gid's expression lost its humor. "She is done working, Alden." Alden looked back toward the remains of Northlight. The answer should have felt like loss. Instead, beneath the grief, he felt something close to relief. Vesper had already given more than anyone had the right to ask. Corinne kept the clinic quiet after surgery. Vesper lay on a thick pad inside the recovery room, one foreleg shaved, a clean bandage wrapping her shoulder and chest. The anesthesia had left her eyes unfocused, but one ear moved when Alden entered. Cinder, Micah, and Flint were in a low pen across the room under Tessa's care. Micah slept against a folded towel. Cinder was attempting to climb the barrier. Flint sat with his front paws spread wide, staring suspiciously at the stainless steel bowl whenever it reflected light. Corinne blocked Alden before he reached Vesper. "She stays down." "I wasn't going to move her." "You have a history of deciding that your intentions qualify as medical training." Alden stopped beside the pad. Vesper lifted her head half an inch. He lowered himself to the floor rather than asking her to rise. "You held enough lines," he said. Her amber eyes settled on him. Corinne checked the fluid line. "The surgery went as well as it could, but the scar tissue from the first injury was already weak. She cannot return to search work, rescue demonstrations, long tracking, or anything involving unstable terrain." Tessa rested one hand on the puppy pen. "She is retired." "Completely," Corinne said. Vesper closed her eyes. Humans often treated retirement as something taken from a working dog. Corinne spoke of it as a boundary finally placed around what remained. Alden understood that difference. Tessa opened the pen to replace a blanket. Cinder pushed toward the gap, but Flint retreated immediately at the scrape of the metal latch. Micah woke and began searching for Vesper. Alden looked at the 3 puppies. "What happens to them?" "We evaluate them when they are older," Tessa said. "Not before." Lenora planned to place 2 in working homes. Lenora planned many things before the creek changed. Corinne adjusted the bandage around Vesper's chest. "Being born to a good search dog does not create a debt." The words stayed with Alden. Cinder might have the drive to work. Micah might grow into a dog suited to emotional support training. Flint might never willingly approach moving water again. None of those futures would make one of them more worthy than the others. Vesper opened her eyes when Micah cried. Her body tensed beneath the bandage. Alden moved the puppy pen closer. "You do not have to get up," he said. Micah pressed her nose through the mesh. Vesper stretched her muzzle toward the puppy without lifting her shoulder. Only then did both settle. Marin's suspension began that afternoon. It was administrative, not punitive, pending review by the State Water Board and the Engineering Licensing Panel. She surrendered her plant access badge at the fire station and placed it on Evelyn's desk without argument. Calder stood in the doorway. The plant was still operating at reduced capacity, while crews inspected the intake and downstream structures. He had not slept,
and the grease stain on his cuff had been joined by dried mud across one sleeve. "You did not order the release alone," he said. Marin looked at the badge. "No. The failed sensor was within redundancy policy." "Yes." "The slope map was county approved." "Yes." Calder waited. Marin picked up her blue waterproof notebook. "And I knew the upper reading was missing. I accepted an old map because the remaining data agreed with the schedule we wanted to keep."
"That does not make you responsible for the mountain."
"No. It makes me responsible for the part I was paid to question." Calder looked as though he wanted to argue. Instead, he pulled out a folded sheet. "I checked every backup generator in the valley." Marin took it. Half required maintenance. 3 had fuel records that did not match actual reserves. 1 clinic transfer switch had been installed incorrectly 7 years earlier. "We built the power system as though the plant would never need to stop," Calder said. Marin read the page. "And we built the river model as though the ground would keep behaving like the map." Neither apologized to the other. The work between them did not require it yet. They began drawing a new list. Independent backup power for the clinic and nursing home. Manual inspection after every failed upper gauge. Updated slope surveys. No winter release based solely on remote readings. A town could survive a disaster and still fail to learn from it. They had no intention of allowing that. Lenora visited Northlight 3 weeks later. She arrived in Tessa's truck with her injured leg in a brace and 2 crutches wedged beside the seat. The snow had begun to recede from the southern slopes, exposing mud, broken timber, and yellow grass beneath. Alden and Gid met them near the edge of the former training yard. Lenora stood without speaking. There was almost nothing left to orient by. The creek had shifted several yards west. The lower kennel foundations were buried beneath silt. The cabin existed only as scattered boards marked with inventory paint by the county. Tessa waited for grief to announce itself. Lenora only asked, "Where was the tower?" Gid pointed to a concrete footing near the new bank. She walked toward it slowly. Every step required effort. Alden offered an arm once. Lenora ignored it, so he did not offer again. At the footing, she found a rusted eye bolt still set in the concrete. "This held the first elevated search line," she said. Tessa looked across the empty ground. "We can rebuild somewhere else." Lenora tightened one hand around the crutch grip. "Not this." "The cooperative?" "This shape." She looked toward the creek. "I kept adding repairs to a design built for a smaller operation and a different river. I told myself preserving it meant preserving the work." Alden understood the confession. Structures could become excuses for refusing to change. Lenora turned to him. "You still have Vesper?" "Corinne says she can move to my cabin next week." "The puppies?" "With her." "That is temporary." Alden nodded. "Until you decide." Lenora looked almost irritated by his restraint. Then she lowered herself carefully onto the remaining concrete footing. "My house in town has stairs. No fenced ground. No space for 4 dogs. Tessa could take the litter." "I know." She looked toward the place where the kennels had stood. "Vesper made her decision before any of us did." Alden said nothing. Lenora drew a folded document from her coat pocket. It transferred Vesper's ownership and medical responsibility to Alden, while preserving Lenora's right to participate in decisions about the puppies until permanent placements were chosen. "This is not payment," she said. "I know." "It is not gratitude." "I know." "It is because she sleeps when she is near you." That answer reached somewhere deeper than thanks would have. Alden took the paper. Lenora did not let go immediately. "Do not turn her into the thing that keeps you useful." He met her eyes. "I will try not to." "That is more honest than promising." She released the document. Behind them, Tessa had begun collecting the few salvageable tower fittings. Gid found one pulley buried in mud and held it up. Lenora pointed with one crutch. "Keep that." Tessa laughed softly. Even ruined places could still contain useful pieces.
The idea for the new program did not arrive as a grand proposal. It began with Gid complaining that Brightwater's rescue ropes were stored in 3 different buildings. Then Hollis noted that half the volunteers had never trained in cold water recovery. Tessa offered to teach animal evacuation if the county provided kennels that could be moved. Corinne demanded written limits on how long dogs could work in cold conditions. Marin, still awaiting the licensing review, began drawing new flood and access maps using updated ground surveys. Lenora contributed her training notebooks, but refused to name the program after Northlight. That name belonged to one place, she said. The work should survive without pretending the place did. The county offered a storage room beside the fire station. It smelled of rubber hose and old paint. One wall leaked during thaw. The only table leaned to the left unless someone folded cardboard beneath one leg. No one called it a center. Not yet. They called it the Brightwater Response Workshop. 2 evenings each month, adults from the valley learned rope handling, cold water safety, emergency animal transport, and how to read evacuation maps. Gid taught knots and threw foam balls at anyone who stepped inside a loaded line. Tessa demonstrated how frightened dogs reacted differently from trained dogs. Corinne ended the first class by reminding everyone that courage was not a veterinary diagnosis. Alden's role was written on one sheet beside the door. Field Safety Advisor. Authority to stop training. He read the words several times. Once he had believed leadership meant being the last person permitted to hesitate. Now his most important authority was the right to say, enough. Vesper came home to Alden's cabin in early spring. Her shoulder had healed into a pale line beneath shorter fur. She still favored the right hind leg after long walks. The red rescue harness remained folded in a cabinet, repaired but never used again. Cinder was the first puppy to show interest in tracking games. Micah preferred sitting beside adults who were anxious or grieving. Flint refused to step onto wet boards and barked at the river from a safe distance, then ran back to Vesper as if he had successfully driven the water away. Alden did not correct him. The 3 puppies carried ordinary objects around the cabin: socks, gloves, a wooden spoon, and once Gid's measuring tape, which required a negotiation. Vesper learned to sleep without waking at every sound. Not always. Enough. One morning, Alden returned to the East Bend with all 4 dogs. Snow remained between the rocks, but the elk stone had cleared. It ran lower now, bright beneath the sun, carrying small branches left by the flood. Alden cast once. Vesper stood beside him. Micah remained close to her shoulder. Cinder pulled toward the scent of something in the willows. Flint kept 6 careful feet between himself and the water. For several minutes, Alden listened to the current. The river no longer seemed innocent. Neither did it seem cruel. It was water, moving through ground that changed. Behind him, a truck horn sounded from the road. Gid leaned out of the driver's window. "Workshop starts in 20 minutes." Alden looked at the fishing line. In the past, he would have let the truck leave. Solitude had once felt like the only place where no one could depend on him and no decision could harm another person. Now he understood that being needed did not require disappearing inside the need. He reeled in the line. Vesper watched him pack the rod. When he turned toward the road, she fell into step without command. The puppies followed in their uneven order, Cinder ahead, Micah close, Flint stopping once to look back at the river. The elk stone continued downstream. It had not carried Vesper back to Northlight. It had carried her away from a place that could no longer hold the life she had become responsible for. Alden climbed toward the road with the dogs around him. He had not repaired the past. Marin had not erased her error. Lenora had not replaced Northlight. Brightwater had not made itself safe forever. Vesper would never work another rescue. But the town had begun building something more honest than restoration. Not one strong person holding every line, a system of hands that could pass the weight before any single grip failed. At the truck, Alden opened the rear door for the dogs. Flint climbed in last. Vesper paused beside Alden and rested her forehead briefly against his knee. Then she joined her puppies. Alden closed the door and looked once more toward the river. He no longer needed its silence to excuse him from the living. He got into the truck. Together, they went where the work was waiting. Sometimes courage is not holding on. Sometimes it is knowing what must be released so that something more precious can survive. Alden, Vesper, and the people of Brightwater could not save every building, every plan, or every piece of the past. But when they stopped asking one person to carry every burden, they found a better way forward. In our own lives, we may face choices with no perfect answer. In those moments, may God give us the wisdom to protect what truly matters, the humility to accept help, and the strength to let others hold the line with us. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and hope. May God guide your decisions and give you peace when the right path is also the hardest one.